Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. I hope all is well with you as we continue to move forward, opening up the country and getting back to normal, or our new normal, in our personal and professional lives. There's even good news in the sporting world as we look forward to getting back to the major sports and get them up and running again. In just a few moments, we'll be joined by football beat writer Orion Sang from the Detroit Free Press to talk about that and, of course, Michigan football. Now, when it comes to college football, we've been on a roller coaster ride for the past few months. Will there be a season? Will we play only conference games? Will there be any fans in attendance? We should have some of those answers in the next few weeks. The NCAA the other day said they were going to allow, and it's not official yet, but they were saying they were going to allow an extra 2 weeks practice for football programs. Those would be 20 hours a week, no pads, light workouts, as they said. Brian Kelly was talking about it on ESPN last night and said what it basically would allow the teams is time to install their offense, their defense, and do the things they didn't get a chance to do in the spring. Athletes are reporting to campus next week in Ann Arbor and beginning summer conditioning, the fall sports that is, so there is reason to be upbeat. I think we all agree we just want to get sports up and going, even if it's going to be a very different experience this year. My guest today says there are still more questions than answers when it comes to college athletics. But it's safe to say the news of the last few weeks has really been encouraging. Up next on our Game Day segment is beat writer Orion Sang from the Detroit Free Press, here on the Michigan Man, so stay with us. Back with us on our Game Day segment this week to talk Michigan football is beat writer Orion Sang from the Detroit Free Press. Great to once again have you with us, Orion.
Good to be back, Mike.
Well, here we are early June, but from talking to fans, they are starting to get excited about college football, Orion, and really the news for the most part has been very positive in recent weeks, hasn't it?
Yeah, as we were just talking before this started, there's always a caveat that nothing's really official until it's official. So until we get the green light from the universities, and the professional teams, I would just hold my breath in terms of sports making a comeback.
Well, you're right, and there is a lot to be decided, but as of today, I think most fans are starting to get optimistic. It depends where you are in the country, too. You read in the Southeast, they're very, very sure that there's going to be a season. In the West, very iffy out there. Southwest, pretty much in the same bag. As of right now, it hasn't even been decided. Even though each university, each conference is developing plans, we really don't know what kind of a season we're going to have anyway, do we?
No, and I think that it'd probably be wise to practice caution. It's better to be safe than sorry, obviously. And you're talking about the health of these student athletes who, they're not being compensated. Obviously, they're receiving scholarships, but this is not a job for them, and you wouldn't want to put them at risk of putting them at risk or their families at risk, obviously, because, their families want to watch them play, and the people around them on campus at risk as well. So better to be safe. And I think some universities are certainly optimistic. I mean, I think if you look at Michigan's comments, they're optimistic that students will return to campus in the fall. Obviously they're taking it one step at a time. They're not going to jump out and say things that they don't necessarily 100% know. They're just taking things very slowly, and I think that's the right approach, I think.
Well, is June 15th the date that the football players and some of the other fall sports are coming back to campus to begin workouts?
Yep, June 15th is the scheduled date that Michigan football will return to campus. Obviously, though, it's contingent on getting the go-ahead from the university and the higher-ups at the university. So we'll see. They haven't announced anything officially yet, but that is what we've heard. June 15th is the date.
The next couple of weeks, the next month will bring to light what is going to happen. There's been so much talk going on, Orion, about the schedules and what teams may or may not play. About a month ago, maybe even not that long ago, there was some talk that Washington had approached Michigan about maybe canceling the game this year. There was some talk of that. It has not officially been canceled yet, though, has it?
No, for now it's still on, and again we'll see. It's hard to really venture guesses to say whether it'll be canceled or go forward. Just because we don't even know if there's going to be a season, and we don't know when the season will start either. Obviously, I think that if you're talking about a road game across the country, the logistics of keeping everybody safe will be a lot more difficult than if you play at home. But that's a problem that it's not unique to Michigan. There's other teams that will have to come up with solutions and ponder that question as well.
Well, and there's been so much talk out there from a lot of different directions, a lot of different areas of the country, and I get it from fans all the time wanting to know, has the NCAA just been talking about a date when practice for football could start, or have they actually penciled one in on the calendar?
I think it's really up to when the individual universities can return to campus. I think Ohio State might have returned this week. Obviously, Michigan is scheduled to return next week. So as for any official plan, I haven't seen anything released. I know there's been a discussion of a 6-week plan that would lead up to the season to get teams in shape, but I don't believe that's been made official yet. So we'll see.
Well, one of the other burning questions surrounding all of this topic is, will there be any fans at games? And we've seen some interesting scenarios pop up from different parts of the country. Ohio State has their own scenario they're working on. Alabama is now saying they're going to have fans. That is going to be interesting to see how that develops, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so too. I just don't know if it's realistic to fill a stadium up, whether you're a college football team or a pro football team, just because it'd be so hard to keep track of anyone who was sick, anyone who did have it or was contagious, obviously. And it's just hard because if you fill the stadium, everyone's in close quarters too. So obviously, if you've been to Michigan Stadium, you're packed in there as a viewer. So it's hard. I don't really foresee any scenario where stadiums are full. And I know Governor Whitmer has said, that she doesn't anticipate stadiums being full in the fall, which is an indication that Michigan is leading that way as well right now.
As we said, some schools are planning on having fans, at least they're talking about it, like Ohio State. But the plans that I've seen from them and from the University of Virginia and some other schools are extremely confusing. I don't know if you've read any of them yet.
No, I haven't gone deeply into them, though.
I have an acquaintance that's in the athletic department at the University of Virginia, and she was telling me they are working every scenario that they possibly can, and they'd pretty much boiled down 20,000 fans maybe at games, but arranging what season ticket holders were going to get what game and how they would work that out. She said it was a nightmare.
Yeah, that's got to be the hardest part about it, right? I do think there's a chance that there will be some fans in the stands this fall, but you got to decide, are we going to allow season ticket holders? Which ones are we going to allow? How many students are you going to allocate seats for? Because obviously students are, louder than your average fan. And if you want to have that, home field advantage type thing, then you're going to have some students in the stands. So there's a lot of questions, and I wouldn't want to be the one having to figure this all out right now. Honestly, it's a pretty difficult situation that the athletic departments are in.
Now, the decision to have or not have fans, does it come down to the state, to the university? Does the NCAA have some say overall in this?
That's a good question. I don't think I have an answer. Obviously, the universities have to take their direction from the state. Michigan's working under the purview of Gretchen Whitmer, right? So when the stay-at-home order was lifted, that's when Michigan started putting together a plan to return to football. For that, obviously you can't have players return to campus. You can't have them return to voluntary workouts before that order was lifted. Even with the order lifted, there's still restrictions in place, right? It allows certain things to happen, but gyms are still closed, and when you do practice, you've got to socially distance outdoors. So all those rules have to be followed. You can't just create your own system and ignore, what your government has dictated. So we'll see how that all works out. But it's complicated, so many different restrictions and things that you have to follow.
I guess I'm at the point right now where it will work itself out in the next week or month and we'll move forward. But in the meantime, there's still other things to talk about. With all the doubts surrounding the season, recruiting has been going full throttle. The Michigan defense picked up 4 four-star kids last week. Very impressive, wasn't it, Orion?
They've actually been doing pretty well. They've earned 15 verbal commitments since the outbreak started in mid-March. and they have 17 players in the class. So, the vast majority of this recruiting class has been put together during quarantine, during this dead period when recruits aren't allowed any in-person contact with programs. And that's, you've got to give credit to the coaching staff. It's a tough situation. I think Michigan is one of those schools that prides itself on selling the campus when kids visit, selling the holistic experience. It's difficult to do that right now, regardless of what virtual tools we have. For Michigan to earn that many commitments during that span, it's certainly impressive. They've added a lot of quality pieces on both sides of the ball, but as you alluded to, recently they've gotten some pretty impressive defensive prospects, a few guys that have really good potential and could be difference makers at the next level.
No, absolutely. And, as of this morning, we, I think, have the number 6 ranked class for 2021 for those that think that's important. And there are still, though, some very big-time kids, especially here in Michigan, that we're in on, Orion.
It actually, differs on a year-to-year basis. Going back to in-state recruiting, I think this might be the strongest in-state class since 2017. 2019 was pretty strong in terms of, offensive linemen because they had Devontae Dobson, Logan Brown, who went to Michigan State and Wisconsin. But I think this is a really strong in-state group. 17 was really strong as well. And in 17, I believe Michigan locked up the majority of the top 10 in-state prospects. So we'll see if they can do that again this year. It'll be difficult because there's a lot of programs that want to dip in and steal some of these in-state prospects. I think Michigan has a shot to land some really highly touted prospects from within their own backyard.
Of course, when it comes to recruiting, the topic for Michigan fans is always how close are we to Ohio State? Is there still that much separation? And, even though this year's class, or 2021, I should say, is ranked number 6, Ohio State is having just an off-the-charts year, aren't they?
Yeah, they're actually on track to put together the best recruiting class of all time, I believe. And they've had some really good classes. Specifically, their 2017 and 2018 classes were probably among the best recruiting classes the Big Ten has ever seen. And you saw the difference that 2017 class made. That 2017 class had Chase Young, Okuda, Wyatt Davis, Josh Myers, J.K. Dobbins. This 2021 class, it could be on the level of that 2017 class. They've got some true difference makers. They've got a 5-star quarterback, a 5-star defensive end, 5-star running back, and some really good pieces along offensive line, defensive line, wide receivers. It's just a really, really strong class. And, at this point, you kind of expect that. Ohio State's recruiting is not going to slow down. The machine kind of runs itself at this point. They have a really good pipeline to the NFL, a lot of star NFL players that are recognizable, like Mike Thomas, Zeke Elliott. And high school recruits, they see that, and they want to be like those guys. They want to make it to the league. They want to compete for championships in college, and Ohio State can offer both. They're recruiting at a level that I don't think any other school in the Big Ten can reach right now.
When you talk to Michigan fans, we're so focused on that gap between ourselves and Ohio State. I tell people, look, we're ranked number 6 in the country right now. We're in the top 10 with a very, very good recruiting class. Let's say Ohio State ends up with the number 1 class, and we're 5 or 6. How much of a separation is there between that number 1 and number 6? Is it that big of a difference?
Honestly, it depends. You'd have to see how Michigan's class shakes out. I think the biggest difference that we've seen between these two schools in the past couple of years has been quarterback play. In 2018, they had Dwayne Haskins, obviously, who was a first-round pick. Now they have Justin Fields. When you look at Michigan's previous 2 games before the past 2 years, in 2016 and 2017, I think Michigan played Ohio State closely, and the quarterback play might have been the reason why. Ohio State didn't have that stud at quarterback yet. J.T. Barrett was a good runner, but he wasn't quite the passer that Haskins or Fields are. And now that they have those guys and they're implementing some air raid principles under Kevin Wilson, I think you're starting to see that talent disparity grow even larger. I think Michigan needs to find their own Justin Fields. Maybe they have that in J.J. McCarthy or someone else in the roster, but they need to find a star quarterback who can level the playing field at that position specifically. Because I don't think that the gap is that large elsewhere. Obviously, there is a gap, but Michigan has proven that it can play close with Ohio State.
Well, the preseason magazines are hitting the newsstand this month. Many of them already out, both Athlon and Street and Smith out, and I think 24/7 Sports did their top 25 today, and they have lots of love for the Big Ten, especially Ohio State. I think they're ranked number 1 in all of those, but they don't seem to be real high on Michigan. I think we're 15, 17, something like that on average in those polls. Does that surprise you at all this time of year?
Not really, no. I don't think preseason polls mean that much, but if you look at Michigan's roster and who they have coming back, I think it makes sense why they're ranked the way some magazines have them ranked. Obviously, they had, 10 guys taken in the draft, 10 or 11, I can't remember the exact number, but they had a lot of guys drafted, a lot of veteran, experienced starters move on, and, they have to replace a lot. So anytime you have to, replace a lot of guys in the 2 deep, it means that you could have some growing pains to start the season. And obviously, Michigan doesn't have the benefit of spring ball. They didn't have a single spring practice. So I think that could impact Michigan as well, especially when it comes to having such a young team this year. So we'll see. I mean, there's some pieces, there's some good pieces. I just think, when you're looking at the Big Ten, it's easy to rank, a couple teams ahead of Michigan right now.
When I was looking at the top 25 today and saw our schedule, thinking about the schedule, you have Ohio State number 1. That's on the road. Penn State was ranked number 5. That, of course, is at home. Wisconsin ranked number 10. That's up in Madison. And Minnesota was at number 20. That also is in Minneapolis. It really is a brutal schedule, isn't it?
Yeah. And until they get Wisconsin off the crossover schedule, it'll be pretty tough, because I think Wisconsin's probably the most consistent team in Big Ten West, and Michigan has to play them, for a while, and they have played them in the past few years. That's a tough game. I think Penn State will be a tough game, but the home team has had a decided advantage in that one over the past 4 years. And then obviously going to Columbus will be a really difficult test at the end of the year. At this point, though, I mean, you can just say that about Michigan's schedule every year. Just the Big Ten is a strong conference, and the teams that Michigan is guaranteed to play, such as Ohio State and Penn State, they're going to be good at this point. They're going to be good. So it looks like another difficult slate, but that's no different from last year or the year before, if you're asking me.
One thing I got email about in the last few days was Paul Feinbaum. I don't know why we get so fascinated by him. He sure is not a Michigan fan favorite, no question, from the SEC network. But he said on Monday, and it ran nationally, that Jim Harbaugh isn't getting it done at Michigan. That guy just won't cut us a break, will he?
Yeah, I think he said that Harbaugh is the most overrated coach in the country. And I mean, obviously Harbaugh hasn't lived up to, the really, really lofty expectations that he arrived here with. I mean, he hasn't been Ohio State. He hasn't made it to the playoffs. He hasn't won a Big Ten. All of those things are true. And, they've all been discussed over and over again. In terms of, ranking him as a coach, it's tough to say if he's overrated, honestly, at this point. I mean, any rational viewer of college football, I think, would have guys like, Dabo, Nick Saban, Ed Orgeron, not who's won a title. They'd have those guys ranked ahead of Jim Harbaugh, and it makes sense to me. I would have them ranked ahead too. But are you going to rank Jim Harbaugh behind, like Mike Leach, or rank him behind someone like David Shaw? I don't think so. I think he's comfortable in that range. You'd rank him behind teams with coaches that made the playoffs, but you'd rank him ahead of some of those other coaches that some people think really highly of. And that's where Michigan is as a program. Really good, but not elite. And I think that probably would sum up Jim Harbaugh as a coach, too.
Well, you just mentioned Coach Ed Orgeron from LSU, and news surfaced over the weekend that Michigan and LSU were talking about a home-and-home series in the years ahead. I don't think I've read any specific dates on that, but a lot of fans don't, in this environment, the playoff environment, don't like playing teams in the preseason like that. But, Tiger Stadium, the big house, 2 schools with great traditions, I like it. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, as a college football fan, yes, you love these showcase type games. I think that's one of the things that I look forward to every year is, the week 1, week 2 matchups. LSU, Texas last year was probably one of the better games I saw all year long. You like it when these marquee programs play each other early in the season. But I do get the other side of it. Like you mentioned, fans, don't really want these tough matchups, and it makes sense. Other teams have shown that you don't have to have a hard non-conference schedule to make the playoffs. You just do your business and win out. I don't think the committee has shown that they care, about your strength of schedule. If you win out, there's a chance that you'll make the playoffs, especially if you're from the Big Ten or SEC or ACC. I do think that this discussion, I don't think you'd see them play anytime soon. I was looking at their future schedules, and Michigan's full in the next 2 years, and LSU's full in 2023. And then you got Michigan playing Texas home and home in 2024 and 2027. And then you got Michigan playing home and home against Oklahoma in 2025 and 2026. And, you just can't foresee Michigan loading up and playing Texas and LSU or Oklahoma and LSU in the same season, right? That'd be a little too difficult, as much as we'd love to see that. I think any potential matchup would be way down the line.
Here with us on our Game Day segment this week is beat writer Orion Sang from the Detroit Free Press. Orion, let's circle back and talk about this year's Michigan team for another couple of minutes. In the Free Press this week, you did a couple of roundtables that were really interesting. One question was, what is the biggest question mark on defense? And you seem to think it's the D-line in the pass rush, right?
I do, yeah. I mean, you look at Josh Uche. He led the team in sacks the past 2 seasons. I mean, he was a huge difference maker up front. I think He was the team's best pass rusher the past 2 seasons. He's such a unique, versatile player. I don't think there's anyone else like him on the roster. And then you look at Michigan overall, and you don't really see that many speedy edge rushers. Like Kwity Paye and Aiden Hutchinson are good. They're good defensive ends. They're really good for the scheme that Michigan runs, but I don't think you would say they're the same level as Josh Uche or Chase Young as a pass rusher. So, and when you're talking about Michigan's defense, they play a lot of man coverage, and you can only play man coverage if you're getting after the quarterback, or else you're just asking for trouble. So I just think it's the biggest question mark. And not only did they have to account for the loss of Uche, but they lost Mike Dana too, who was a really productive edge rusher and played a lot for Michigan. So there's some holes there. We'll see who steps up. It's going to be one of the things I'm watching most closely entering the season.
Well, another question posed in one of those roundtables was, after Ohio State, who is our toughest opponent or opponents? And share your thoughts on our schedule on just who you think it would be after Ohio State.
Yeah, so, for me, it came down to Penn State or Minnesota. You saw last year when Penn State went to Minnesota how difficult it was to play there. That stadium was amped up. And I think Minnesota is an exciting young team. They lost some guys, they lost some big-time players, but they still bring back quarterback, and they still bring back their star receiver, Rashad Bateman. That offense could still be good. And then you look at Penn State, Penn State and Michigan have gone back and forth, the past few years. And Penn State should be very strong again, too. They have a returning quarterback. They got some really good players on defense, like Parsons at linebacker. I think that could be a tough game for Michigan in Ann Arbor. And they've also recruited really well, too. So even though they've lost some guys, I think they have, younger players who are ready to step up and take on bigger roles. Credit to James Franklin. He's recruited really well the past few cycles. And then obviously Minnesota, too, has been on the upswing under PJ Fleck. So those two games should be pretty difficult.
Well, another roundtable question was about the quarterback position. And I think all of us know that is what most Michigan fans are interested in. And we know... according to Josh Gaddis, there is no front runner. He said that over and over heading into camp. Do you think that's really the case, that they don't have an idea who is the number one guy right now?
If they did have an idea, they wouldn't want to tell us. I think, though, that I wrote about Joe Milton in a roundtable, and my colleague Reiner wrote about Dylan McCaffrey. Those two guys seem like maybe the front runners in that room. Cade McNamara was a touted recruit, broke a lot of records in high school, but he doesn't have experience that Milton and McCaffrey do. They've gotten in games before Milton played against Ohio State, and they've been on campus longer. So I think those two guys probably hold the edge. And then, when you're comparing the two, I think the lack of spring ball hurts both of them. Obviously, it would have been a huge chance for one of them to pull ahead of the other. It could hurt Milton more than McCaffrey because, McCaffrey's had one more year on campus than Joe Milton. He's older, and he was a backup quarterback last year, too, ahead of Milton on the depth chart. So we'll see. It obviously is one of the biggest questions facing this team. I would say it is the biggest question facing the team is obviously who will start at quarterback. That's the most important position on the field. So we'll see. It's one of those things where just not being able to play in the spring and not being on campus, that could really affect the competition, and that could affect who starts. That could affect how they play in the opener. That could affect how they play in the first 2 games of the season. You won't know until it happens, but it's one thing I'm keeping an eye on for sure.
The fact that they did not get spring ball under their belt is huge because we don't know when fall practice is going to start. Let's say they have 4 or 5 weeks. Is that enough time for there to be a separation? Maybe it will, and maybe there won't. But if there's not much difference between the two, it'd be interesting to see if Jim lets them both play early.
Yeah, we've seen that before, too. We saw in 2017, Wilton State and John O'Corn played. So, it wouldn't surprise me if they try that this year, too. Maybe we'll see that. He's shown a willingness to try that in the past. Obviously, you'd want to have a guy locked in, ready to go. But if both are neck and neck and you want both to stay, why don't you just play both and see what happens,
Well, Ryan, Jim is getting a lot of praise for the way in which he responded to his team regarding the George Floyd situation, even joining the team in a protest march in Ann Arbor. He has been very proactive on this, hasn't he?
I think one common thing you've seen with him is that he's not afraid to speak his mind on subjects that he's researched and thought about. I would say he's a very socially active coach. You've seen him stand out on a lot of issues. I remember when he first got to Michigan, summer of 2015, I believe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, summer of 2015, there was that whole debate about American Sniper and showing it on campus. And, Harbaugh said that he would show it to his team. That was a freedom of speech issue, basically, the way I see it. And there's this topic now with the police brutality and systemic racism. Mm-hmm. He's done his research too. He's spoken with Colin Kaepernick. he's shown a willingness to speak up. He spoke up about abortion, I think, a couple months ago. So, he will talk about things that he believes in, and he will talk about why. I think that makes him unique. You don't really see that many other football coaches talking about these social issues as often as him. I wasn't surprised that he attended that protest in Ann Arbor. It seemed like a very Jim Harbaugh thing to do, to be honest.
Well, final question for you, Orion. For Michigan fans, I think we all value what Jim does for his players on and off the field. I don't think there's any argument about that in the community. Very involved in a positive way for the most part. And do you think that is right now the main reason the fan base, has not turned on him, despite the fact he has not beaten Ohio State?
Could be one of the reasons. I think it could play a role for sure. I think if you're proud of your coach off the field, that would play a role in how you view him, in a positive or negative light. But to be fair, it's not like the on-field product has been shabby either. He's averaging like 9.5 wins per season. It's not bad. He's given Michigan fans a lot of good memories. They've beaten Michigan State, they've beaten Notre Dame, they've beaten Penn State, they've beaten Wisconsin. I think Michigan fans over the past 5 years, while there's certainly been a lot of disappointment and bitter feelings, I think they would still say overall that, it was a positive experience. If you surveyed the fan base, that's what I think they would say. I don't think any fan would say that they prefer a 6-7 or 5-7 season, over a 10-3 season. I think that plays a role into their feelings as well.
No, absolutely. I think, you look at surveys that have been done locally in the last couple of months since the end of the season, and fans are very, very proud, I think, in unison of how he represents the university and what he does off campus and with the student athletes, the academic excellence on this football team. If he just can break this slump against Ohio State, that would be huge for him, wouldn't it?
Like you point out, I think he's done a lot of good for the university. I think it helps that he's been out on this issue of student-athlete rights. He came out with that proposal that would allow college players to test NFL draft waters earlier than they currently are allowed. That certainly is something where I think, fans could and maybe should be proud of him for being active on that front. I just don't see too many instances where, fans would want to set themselves aside from the coach. I think that he's done a lot of things that would engender, passion and positive feelings from the fan base. And he's got some more steps to take on the field, but, he's sort of rebuilt this program in the time that he's been here too. So I think that certainly has won over a lot of people.
Absolutely. A lot to be thankful for and positive about. And hopefully in the coming weeks, we can start focusing on the product on the field and what's happening. So that we look forward to. Our guest here on our show today on the Game Day segment has been beat writer Orion Sang from the Detroit Free Press. And as always, Orion, appreciate you taking the time. Hopefully the next time we chat, it is about what's going to happen on the field.
Hopefully, Mike. We'll see.
Thanks again to beat writer Orion Sang from the Detroit Free Press for being so gracious with his time once again. He's always a great guest. A reminder, we are on our summer schedule of 2 shows a month. Our next program will air on June 24th, so mark that on your calendar. We hope to have Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports join us with another recruiting update and hopefully some more good news and big commits. That will do it for another week, though. Thanks for joining us, and don't forget to tell your friends and family about the show. Make sure you like us or give us that 5-star rating wherever you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!